Okay, I see post on Samba talking about how difficult it is to do the window seal press in here. See a lot of people giving up. I thought I'd give it a try anyway, and it worked out well. I built this jig for it. This would be the driver's side. So I'm going to go through the steps to build the jig on the passenger side because it worked. Show you what I did, and I'll come show you the window in a minute. But essentially all I've got is a base and some support structures that if it were to fit this way, that's not going to work because of the clasp. It would fit in here, so when I press, I have some clamping calls to press against on this side. And on the bottom, I did a cutout here so that I could get underneath and grab the rubber on the bottom and grab the rubber on the top, because right here is where it bunches up and it becomes the thickest. And as I had a helper clamp, I could stretch the rubber so that it would seat in there better. And I put this piece on the bottom so that I could put it in a bench vise. So if my bench vise was here, I have clamps that run this way, and then I have access to the bottom to be able to get to it. So I'm going to show you how I do that. First step is you need a substrate, and right here, you can use whatever, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, just whatever you got laying around the shop. Big enough to fit the window structure. It doesn't matter if the post hangs off the end, but basically you're going to get a square that fits that. And I've got 4 pieces which correspond here, no particular size. Long one on the long side, 2 short ones, wherever they go. And I'm going to put a radius on one of them to meet that curve. I've recessed this so the screw heads aren't sticking out. But mostly the screws I'm going to glue them on so they're nice and firm, and they're not going to move on me at all. And the screws are to hold it while the glue sits. So there's my 4 pieces. I'll put my radius on after I trace this. But the first step is to mark the hole for this, because you want this to sit down flush. And if you notice, it's not going to sit totally flush because that's stepped. If you can see, let me get the screen so I can. So this is stepped. This is all flat and it steps out. And then there's a swoop that fits in here. It'll step it as well. If you notice over here, I put some just double-sided tape. I put some shims in there to lift it up and get it even. Except for when I did that based on this, not based on having the swoop, which sits deeper. So what I ended up doing was just getting some little pieces of wood and just shimming it in there so that everything was flush, so that my clamping pressure was perpendicular. So first things first, you want to mark so that the edges are even with the board. You want your glass and your edge to line up evenly on the top and the bottom when you're finished. So if you put it in like this, when you clamp, your glass is going to be sticking out. So you need to get even with the edge of the board before you mark this place to drill. And then I basically mark around here, and I'll go drill a hole there so it can move around in there, and then I'll come back. So here's the driver's side glass that I did, and I'll put it down here. So it's not going to work out that great here. Essentially, the clasp is up, and the pivot point is down. Fits in that slot. So when it goes in, it's going to look somewhat like that. It'll be horizontal like that. So one thing I did was I made these blocks about 3/4 of an inch. It gives you enough depth that they're all the same height. And I put a caul, when I clamped, I put a caul here so that I'm not clamping at individual points in the glass. I'm distributing it across the glass. And I clamped from the caul to this position. And I'm using some Bessie clamps that you can probably see in the background, right back there. They're nice and square, but they're heavy and they're awkward. But having these all at the same position allow me to just rest that there and rest it here, so I'm not fighting my clamp, and I don't need more than just an extra little hand to tighten this all down. So of note, keep these the same height so that all rest equally. So after I clamped it all in, I was happy with the result. What I did was I used the rubber off J-Bugs. I've got some other ones I was going to try if this didn't work, but that worked well. And I'm trying to skimp in that I am trying to use one rubber and do 2 windows with it. So you've got a piece, the most amount of rubber consumed is going to be down here because you've got to come all the way to the top here and all the way here. So you can't just cut it down the center, you have to cut it on a diagonal. So essentially I got it on here so both sides were covered. There's a little bit left on the inside. Rolled it around and made the other side tight so that essentially when I trimmed this off I'd end up with a thick strip coming down to a thin strip so I can do this window. If it doesn't work, then I'll use some different rubber. It's probably easier if you just use this 2 different strips because you've got more to play with, to work around with down here. So I put that all in, you put your swoop in, you put that all down, you get a caul set up, I pulled my rubber back out of the way, laid my clamps on there, and started clamping it down. And I used just hair gel as a lubricant. And the reason I did that is because I wanted it to be kind of mildly adhesive as it dried. So it was great as a lubricant. I'm assuming that it worked okay because nothing's popped out. But you'll see here I got it pressed completely in and flush right there, and completely in and flush right there. And I've trimmed the rubber back. I've got a little bit of trimming to do in here. I need to modify an X-Acto knife tip so that I can get that cleaned up a little bit better. But now I have a functional working hinge and everything cleaned up nice. So that's what I'm going to do on this side. So what I just did was I cut the relief here, and now that can sit flush. So now I'm going to adjust this slightly. So now what I'm going to do is trace the edge here of where everything's sitting. Once I move around on you is a problem. You don't need the inside edge, but I trace it anyway just so I can see the thickness. Also, it helps me know where things are when I line up that relief cut so I can get to the bottom. Alright, so with that there, I got to figure out which blocks go where. This block obviously would be best on the long side. One thing to note here, that when you put your blocks in, notice that that one's chamfered and that one's cut at an angle so that they're flush with this edge, because when you put your caul there, you don't want those sticking out, pulling your caul out, so you got an uneven clamping area. So let's put this one here and this one here, and I'll put the radius on that one. So let me go put the radius on, and then what I'm going to come back and do is trace these so I know where my glue goes, so I don't have a mess of glue going everywhere. And then I will clamp and screw these on, and then I'll look at putting a relief cut in here, which I'll trace out, do that with the jigsaw, and then I'll have to put a piece of board on the bottom, and I think I'll just use some loose shims in here on this one, and this one will be ready to go. I've just got to clean out the bedding compound they put in here, and I need to drill this out and replace that. And otherwise this is good, just probably could use a little bit of cleanup on the inside track. So I'll be back. So I put on a couple. What I do is I put it down, get the frame, make sure everything lines up, hold it, trace a mark. So when I flip it, I know where to put my glue because I glue both sides. But what I found was I started here on that frame. I started on this side, on the lower post side, and I'd recommend you do that. I started here this way, and then went this way. And don't put all these on. Don't mark it and then put all those on, because you'll probably get slightly off, and you don't want to end up with your frame sloppy so that you're pushing it out. You want it to be braced at its natural point so that you're pushing it into the frame instead of spreading the frame. So do one piece at a time. Mark a piece, put it in, make sure that these line up. Move to the next piece. Make sure those line up. Mark it, glue it. Everything's still good. Move to the next piece. I would move this way because this is a more rigid part of the frame and you get less sloppiness. I started over here this time and realized that when I put that on, I marked it, I'm good. And then when I put this on, I'm getting slightly off, and in order to get this right, this was wrong, and I had to relieve that to get it back out. I didn't have as much fiddliness when I did it the way over here. So I'd recommend you do this one, this one, this one, and then come back and do this last one. So I'm going to put this last one on right now. I've marked it. I've tested. I pushed that in. These are just proud of the edge of this, so I can get full clamping pressure. So I marked it. I put some glue on here. My glue tip is getting clogged. I'm trying not to put too much glue near the rail, so I don't get squeezed out on it, so I don't have to clean it up. Shift it to my line. Everything looks good. It helps if you clamp it before you screw it. That way your screw doesn't want to, if you don't have your holes pre-drilled, your screw may want to lift the boards apart. So that's flush, that's good. That's good. Everything's good. Put my screws in, drive that in. Okay. Those are good. I got some squeeze out. Take my frame out of there. I don't have any glue on it. We'll just wipe up any squeeze out so that doesn't create an issue. Alright, and then the next step is going to be to cut this relief. Essentially I popped that in there. And I want to be able to, I don't want to come right next to the end of the frame, but just add a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact. You don't want to take it all away. You don't want to weaken that so much that you don't have a good rigid structure for clamping. So I'm just doing it enough that I can get my fingers in and manipulate the rubber from the inside. And then the only thing left to do is drill and put a stand for the vise on there. And then I'm going to let this all sit up overnight, and then I'll come back and we'll clamp this in here. I'll get this cleaned up and get the rubber ready. One other thing I note, if you hold tight, is I cleaned up some of the bedding compound that comes in the factory. You can see some of this is left. Initially I thought it was if you can see the texture in here, I thought it was fiberboard. Turns out the rubber has that texture pattern, makes it look like a fiberboard. So essentially they put some kind of bedding compound or putty in here, and they put it from, this dips up from that, they bridged it all the way to here. So it went over the top, covered these rivets, went down in this channel and bridged it and barely covered the rivets up, in the locking mechanism. And so I tried a couple different ones, and I found that this one kind of matched the factory the best in terms of its, it didn't dry real quick, it stayed malleable for several hours. When it's dry, you can slice it with the razor, you can manipulate it. I just used a screwdriver. I filled it in, used a screwdriver to kind of make it flush. That's fine. I'll probably put a little bit more there. And I think they just did that so that when you put the seal and then the glass, any wear won't take these rivets and drive the rivets through the rubber so that they're rubbing on the glass and create a problem. That's just my best guess. Because otherwise you've got an uneven surface. You get a high surface and then no backing, a high surface with rivets in the middle and then no backing. And then the glass is chamfered here, and I think they just did that so that it's bridged on the chamfer. So we'll let that dry. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to put the piece on here. I'll come back tomorrow or the next day. I'll clamp the glass in. Okay, so the final part here. I finished the jig. I've got it clamped in here with this open area where I can get in from the bottom to just a bench vise. And I went ahead beforehand and drilled the old clasp out and riveted a new clasp in. And then I've done a little bit of pre-work here to set this stuff up. I showed you that bedding compound looked fine. I'm going to leave that right up here. But since I did all new stuff in here, essentially I took this ultra gray gasket maker 75191. And I bridged the gap essentially from this hump right here. I smoothed it all the way out so that all the rivets are covered. I just took a screwdriver, squeezed it in there, took a screwdriver, ran it down the channel so that, let's see if I can get it to focus. Yeah, I guess it's focused. So that it's nice and smooth and the rivets aren't popped up there. So they're going to cut into the bottom, and that's you've got plenty of working time with this. I don't know what the setup time. It's probably like 2 to 4 hours. So that should mold around seal as I put it in. I also put some of that underneath this if you're putting a new one in, because when I pulled the old one out, it had bedding compound in there just to fill gaps and make sure it's nice and tight. There's no movement in this. Everything's working good. So what I do is I need some shims, because when I put the swoop on here, that's going to have this side drop down, this side's going to be sitting up. So I want everything level so that I'm not pressing with it kind of cattywampus like that. So I basically figure out and grab some spare pieces of wood that will fill that gap up. So I cut them off, and basically I'm going to put the swoop in. Don't forget the swoop. If you forget the swoop, you can't fix it. You got to take it all back apart. Alright, so swoop's in. Get all these out of the way and I'll show you how to set it up. Alright, so that's in. Now the swoop is kind of lifted here, and I want to get it so that it's flush. You can't really see that here, but right here, if you just let gravity sit, this is lifted up, and you want it to sit flush into its recess. So I got a shim that I'll stick in here. And then I'm going to shim around here and here. I'm going to get everything at the same level. I'll get a couple shims in the back here. Oops, got one right there. And stick one right here. Alright, now that kind of, this drops down, so I've got a thinner shim that I pushed under here, and now there's no rocking and the whole thing's level. And then the final check here is to make sure that this sits flush, the frame here sits flush or slightly proud of the substrate, and the same thing here. And it does, so I'm ready to clamp. So I'm going to do this the same way I did last time. Hopefully it works out the same. Get this out of the way. I have a helper here who's going to help me with extra hands. So you're going to need a caul, because you don't want to clamp directly on the mirror in certain points. So I'm going to put the caul up here. Let's get this clasp out of my way. All right, so caul here. I have 2 clamps. You can use whatever clamps you have, but I find that these clamps work very well because they clamp square. Bessie, Fox, a number of people make them. Again, so I got glue on these, so. Alright, so I'll get that set and ready. And then get this one set and ready. Okay. And I'm going to need your help with the clamping. So I told you in the last video that I was being cheap and I was trying to use 1 J-bug seal. And this is what I meant by that. So the J-bug seal is that wide, about 3 inches wide. And so you need enough width to be able to, on this part right here, to cover from the top of here all the way around to the top of this one. So you need a fat part here. And that's what I was trying to describe, is I needed to cut this on a diagonal. So I'm going to put the thin part of this at the top and the thick part so it ends up down here, and I have enough. So I clean all that off, and if you have any polishing to do on your window, do it now before you do this. Alright, so I'm going to basically just get it lined up and make sure that so just like that. We've got the thick part here. It's evenly matched. Alright, so I'm going to have my helper help me with this. Take that hair gel. I want you to take the hair gel and I want you to take it on your finger. Yep, just like that. Rub it right down the middle here. Right down the middle there. And I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to have you go around the edge too. You get more if you need it. And the reason I'm using hair gel, and you could use 100 different things for this. I picked hair gel because it's slick when you're putting it on, and then when it dries it gets sticky, so my thought or hope is that it will act as a mild adhesive. And with it as a mild adhesive, it'll help this stick in the frame just a little bit better. Alright, I'm going to pick this up. Okay. Helps if you turn it upside down. Turn it upside down. There you go. That should be plenty. Okay. So when I put this in, double check that everything's centered. It's going to be hard to get it not centered. I start here and basically I'm going to rotate it in like that. You want to get it just about in the right position here. And then I fold this under. This is where this comes in handy. Get that up out of the way. Oh, it's slipping. This would be easier if I wasn't trying to skimp on this. It might be better if you could see what I was doing here, and maybe I'll bring it around here so you can see it, because I think that would be helpful. I've kind of lost my track here. I'm going to move this so you can hopefully see what I'm doing here. that wasn't too bad. Okay. So I've got it in here and I'm rotating it around. And notice I got the rubber off here. So I'm just checking top to bottom that I've got the rubber and it's bending over correctly. It's fighting me. I didn't have this much problem on the last one. Alright, so we'll pull it so it stays. Okay. So now I'm going to push this side in so that it's almost flush right here. And then I'm going to push this side in. Then I'm going to get my caul set up and just check everything to make sure that you've got enough rubber on both sides, because I can't get in here now. So let's push that out. There we go. Yep. And my hands are getting slick. So push this in, slowly work it in, and that seats it down in here. And you can get it just by doing this most of the way in. That's flush. This is out by 1/8 of an inch. Alright. Double check all your rubber. Alright, now I'm going to put the caul on. So at this point, last time I left this stuff on and it glued fine. At this point I'm going to cut this. So I'm actually got the caul directly against the glass. Or as much as possible. So I wouldn't go crazy with this. Trying to cut it exact. Just get it mostly there. And I'll cut some of this off to get it out of the way. Okay. And then I'm going to cut just like that. Okay, here's where I need my assistant for. Get your clamps. Let's do it this way. Okay. I'll hold that clamp here. I want you to balance it right here so that it doesn't fall. I'm going to set the caul up. Now push those red pieces in. There you go. Keep going like that. Do the same thing on this one. Okay. Now, hang on a second. Helps to have hands here. Okay. Screw that one. Push that one in right here and screw that one. Screw that. Okay. A little bit on this one. Alright. So from this point, I'm just slowly working it in, and it's just going to press in here. Make sure these are square, relatively square, and you give it just a little bit of clamping pressure. Don't overdo it. Go make a check. I'm flush to the metal here. And I can do this one just slightly more. I'm flush on the metal here, which means that's as far in as it's going to go. So then you're probably good at that point, but I'll work this a little bit. See, I really wish I would have. This is helpful if you got enough rubber down here. I really don't even have enough rubber to grab here. Just if I got a pair of needle nose pliers, I could. But essentially, I'm gonna pull and stretch this. I'm gonna hold it here. I'm gonna pull and stretch this, and so that'll thin the rubber and let it kind of sit and bed down in there. Just make sure you don't pull it from one side so far that you pull it out and now you've you've got not enough rubber in there. I've got a little bedding compound squeezing out here, so let me get rid of it. And this is the part where it bunches up in this curve. So this is the part that I spent most of the time like giving it a tug, thin it out, give it a tug, thin it out. Alright, so that's good. Right here on the fulcrum, it'll be the loosest. You'll notice it moving around, and that's because there's a chamfer on the glass, and so that's not totally seated there, so don't worry too much about this area. It's just above and below it, and particularly down in the tight turn. Alright, so, and if that'll let it come in a little bit more. And then the last thing I did was, and I have no idea if this has much effect or not, but I did it anyway, is I used a hair dryer. If you use a heat gun, just be careful, to heat up all along here. The thought is that that's going to let the seal kind of soften up and fit, bed down more, and let it slide around a little bit with the lubrication, and then it'll sit. And then I'll let this sit overnight. All of this will dry off. That'll clean right off with water. You can buff it off. And then I'll come back when I'm done and take it all out of here, and I'll cut the seal right at the edge. And the tricky part is the swoop down here. Somebody on the Samba posted the idea of this, and I had limited success with it. I'm still going to try a little bit more, but take an X-Acto knife, I haven't done it with this, and essentially heat that up glowing hot, and then take a pair of pliers and bend that over to 90 so that you can get down in that channel and cut. So I got one partially cut, it's a little ragged, I need to spend some more time with it. So that's how I'm doing it. It really wasn't all that hard to get it to go in, particularly with that lubrication, with the right clamps and this and a couple sets of hands. I'll see how it goes tomorrow. We'll see if it sticks. The first one stuck, was in there real good, wasn't falling out or anything, so I'm happy with it. So hopefully this helps somebody. Okay, it sat overnight, so we're going to see how we did. And one thing to note, I changed something up just to see how differently this might perform. I had a long call in here, which essentially had pressed in and was stopping right here on the metal and right here on this metal. So after about an hour or two, I said, let me try this and see if I push it in just a little bit further. So I took a shorter call that sits inside these metal points and was resting only on the glass. Reclamped it, it came in a little bit, so let's see how it did, see if it pulls back out or not. I actually think this is probably a preferable way to do it. Okay. Okay, glass didn't pop out. So we've got a good seal all the way around. I'll trim all that off. There's seal exposed here. The glass is in there, it's not pulling out. And if I look here, let me just trim this so I can see. Stay right here with that. Where's my scalpel? Okay, got a better knife. So, cut there. Well, maybe not. This blade's getting dull too. I'm using it against metal in some spots. Okay, so we can see a little bit better. Flush with the edge. This actually brought it in just a little bit more. So I think this is a preferable way to do it. Because because the glass sits a little bit more, it's a little bit tighter, it's seated more in the channel. So now the job is to go through and slice that, that cut flush here. I get a little bit of squeeze out of my bedding compound, that'll come off. And the same thing here and down here. This is the tricky part. So I don't need to videotape that. I think you guys can find it. Just use a really sharp knife. Try not to scratch your glass.